The late afternoon sun of a New England August is a special kind of magic. It filters through the ancient, heavy leaves of the oak trees that line the streets of Portsmouth, dappling the historic brick sidewalks with a soft, golden light. From the bay window of my study, I have a perfect view of my garden, a chaotic, beautiful English-style affair that is the product of 30 years of patient, loving work. I am 70 years old. My home is a beautiful, creaky, and entirely paid for Victorian house. My son, Mark, is a successful architect with a wonderful family of his own. My life is a quiet, orderly, and deeply contented thing. It is a life I built not just from the ground up, but from a place far deeper than that I built it from a hole, a void, a silence that was created for me on a cold, grey morning 52 years ago. My son, Mark, and my two grandchildren, Sophie and Leo, are visiting this weekend. The house, usually a quiet sanctuary of books and memories, is filled with the glorious, chaotic noise of their presence. Leo, who is 7, is in the backyard, engaged in a loud and very serious war with a squadron of imaginary pirates. Sophie, who at 12 is on the cusp of a cool, teenage disdain for everything, is nonetheless curled up in my late husband's favorite armchair, completely engrossed in a book she pulled from my shelves. Mark finds me in the study, where I'm cataloguing a new collection of first editions for the bookstore I owned for 3 decades before finally, reluctantly retiring. He leans against the doorframe, a quiet, happy smile on his face. At 51, he is a good man, a kind man, with my eyes and my late husband's steady, gentle nature. He is my life's greatest work. You know, he says, his voice low. Warm rumble. Sophie asked me a question in the car on the way up here. She asked me what you were like when you were a teenager. I look up from the book I am examining, a small, sad smile touching my lips. And what did you tell her? I told her I didn't know, he says. I told her your life, your real story, only started the year I was born. He means it as a compliment, a testament to my strength as a mother, but his words, innocent as they are, send a small, cold shiver down my spine. He is right. My life, the one the world sees, the one my own son knows, did begin the year he was born, because the year before that, the year I was 18, is a year I have never spoken of. It is a year that was, for all intents and purposes, erased, a chapter ripped out of my own history by the 2 people who were supposed to be its authors. The year was 1973. The place was a small, conservative, and deeply religious town in central Pennsylvania. A town of church socials, of immaculate lawns, of a suffocating, small-town piety where the greatest of all sins was not cruelty or unkindness, but the crime of embarrassing your neighbors. And my parents, Arthur and Helen, were the high priests of that religion. My father was a deacon at our Presbyterian church. My mother was the head of the Ladies' Auxiliary. Their public reputation, their standing in the community, was the sun around which their entire universe, and by extension my own, was forced to orbit. I was a good daughter. I was quiet, I was obedient, I got good grades, I had a scholarship waiting for me at a small, respectable women's college. My life was a neat, orderly path that they had laid out for me. But I had a secret, a wonderful, terrifying, and life-altering secret. I was in love. His name was Michael. He had beautiful, sad eyes, and he was a boy from the wrong side of the tracks who was, in a few short months, going to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. Our love was a frantic, desperate, and beautiful thing, a small, perfect jewel of a world we had built for ourselves in defiance of the larger, colder world that was waiting to tear us apart. And then, one humid, summer afternoon, I discovered that our love had created a new secret. I was pregnant. I remember the terror. It was a cold, physical thing, a knot of ice in my stomach. But underneath the terror, there was also a strange, fierce, and undeniable joy. A baby, Michael's baby, a small, living piece of our love that the war, the world, could not take away. I was naive, of course, a foolish, romantic, 17-year-old girl. I thought our love would be enough. I thought my parents' love for me would be enough. Michael never found out. A week after I saw the positive result on the little plastic test, a black, government-issued car pulled up to his family's small house, and he was gone, off to basic training, and then to a place I could not pronounce. A place from which he would never return. I spent the next 2 months in a state of secret, terrified grief and hope. My body was changing, my secret was growing, and I knew I could not keep it to myself any longer. I had to tell my parents. I chose a Sunday evening. After church, we were in the living room, a space of perfect, oppressive tidiness, the air thick with the smell of my mother's pot roast. I sat on the stiff, plastic-covered sofa, my hands trembling in my lap, and I told them. My voice was a small, quiet whisper. "Mom, Dad, I said, I'm going to have a baby." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was a silence of pure, cold, and absolute horror. I watched as the 2 people I loved and trusted more than anyone in the world looked at me, their only child, and I saw not a flicker of concern for me, their scared, pregnant, and grieving daughter. I saw only a reflection of their own, profound and deeply selfish shame. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice was not a whisper, it was a low, venomous hiss. "How could you?" she asked, her face a pale, tight mask of disgust. "How could you do this to us? To us. Not, what has happened to you? Not, are you okay? But, how could you do this to us?" My father stood up and began to pace the length of the living room, his face a thunderous mask of rage. "Who was it?" he demanded. "Was it that boy, that greasy, good-for-nothing boy from the mill?" I knew he was trouble. His name was Michael. I whispered, tears now streaming down my face. "And he's gone. He was drafted." "Good," my father spat, the word a physical blow. "He can go and die in some jungle for all I care. He has brought nothing but sin and shame into this house." He stopped pacing and looked down at me, his eyes cold and hard as stone. "You have shamed this family, Rosemary. You have shamed our name. You have shamed God." The conversation that followed was not a conversation, it was a sentencing. They were not my parents, they were my judges, my jury, and my executioners. My options, as they laid them out, were simple. I could go away to a home for unwed mothers, a place they had heard of through the church, give the baby up for a quiet, closed adoption, and then return home in a year, and we would all pretend that this shameful, sordid business had never happened, or I could leave. "I'm not giving my baby away," I said, my voice finding a strength I did not know it possessed. It was the first and the last time in my life that I had ever truly defied them. My father's face hardened into a mask of pure, cold finality. "Then you are no longer welcome in this house." He said, "We will not have a living, breathing symbol of your sin under our roof. We will not be the subject of the town's gossip. We have a reputation to uphold, a position in the community." My mother, who had been sitting in a state of frozen, tearful shock, just nodded in agreement. And that was it. My life, as I knew it, was over. The next morning, they woke me at dawn. My mother had packed a small suitcase for me, a few changes of clothes, a Bible, a bar of soap. She would not look at me. My father was waiting in the car. He drove me, in a state of complete, stony silence, to the bus station on the other side of town. He walked me to the cold, hard, plastic bench. He took his wallet out and handed me a single $20 bill. "You have made your bed," he said, his voice a low, final judgment. "Do not contact us again. As far as anyone in this town will be concerned, you have run away to the city to live a life of sin. We have no daughter." He turned and walked away without looking back. He got in his car, the car he had taught me to drive in, and he drove away, leaving me, his pregnant 18-year-old, and now officially orphaned daughter, alone on a bus station bench with a small suitcase, $20, and the terrifying, unknown future of 2 lives resting entirely on my shoulders. I look at my son now, my beautiful 51-year-old son, as he laughs at something my granddaughter has said. And I see the ghost of that boy, that brave, resilient baby I raised in a series of cheap, cold water flats, the boy I had worked 3 dead-end jobs to support. I see the years of poverty, of loneliness, of a struggle so profound and so absolute that it is a miracle we both survived, and I feel a surge of pride, so fierce it almost takes my breath away. I had done it, all on my own. I had taken the $20 and the life they had thrown away, and I had built a new one, a better one. A life full of love and books and a real, true, and unconditional family. I have not spoken to my parents, Arthur and Helen, in 52 years. I do not know if they are alive or dead. They had succeeded in erasing me from their lives, and I, in turn, had been forced to erase them from my own. I had made my peace with that. I had closed that chapter, locked that door, and I had thrown away the key. The past was another country, and I had no desire ever to visit it again. It is a Tuesday morning in October, a little over 2 months after my grandchildren's summer visit. The air in Portsmouth, New Hampshire has turned crisp. And the ancient maple tree outside my bookstore is a blaze of defiant, fiery red against a cool, grey sky. The past, the subject of my son's innocent question, had settled back into its proper place, a locked, dusty archive in the back of my mind. My life had returned to its comfortable, placid rhythm, a rhythm I had fought for 52 years to create. My days were a quiet, gentle symphony of my own composition. I would wake early, when the morning mist was still clinging to the Piscataqua River, and I would sit in my bay window with a cup of strong, black coffee and a book. My house, a tall, slightly crooked Victorian lady painted a cheerful shade of periwinkle blue, was my fortress. Every worn floorboard, every overstuffed bookshelf, every piece of mismatched, comfortable furniture was a testament to my survival. I had filled its rooms not just with things, but with a sense of peace so profound, so absolute, that it was the most valuable thing I owned, after my husband, David, had passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. The silence in this big house had been a crushing weight, but I had, as I had always done, endured. I had learned to live with the quiet. I had learned to fill it with my own thoughts, with the rustle of turning pages, with the soft, contented purr of my old cat, Jasper. By 9 o'clock, I would walk the 3 charming, brick-lined blocks to my bookstore, Rosemary's Reads. I had opened it 30 years ago with David, a terrifying, exhilarating leap of faith funded by a second mortgage on this very house and our life's meager savings. It had started as a small, dusty, used bookshop. Over the decades, I had transformed it slowly and with great care into a beloved local institution. We had expanded into the storefront next door, adding a small, sunny cafe that served the best coffee and scones in town. The bookstore was more than my business, it was my life's work. It was the physical proof that the girl who had been left on a bus station bench with $20 had not just survived, but had thrived. That Tuesday morning was like any other. I was at the front counter of the shop, talking to my manager, a sharp, funny, and deeply competent young woman named Clara. Clara had been with me for 10 years. Since she was a college student working part-time, she was the daughter I had never had, and I knew, slowly preparing to hand the reins of my beloved store over to her. We were discussing the upcoming order for the Christmas season, our busiest time of year. We need to double the order on the new Stephen King, she was saying, her pen tapping a rhythm on her notepad. And I think we should do a bigger display for the local poets this year. Their stuff actually sold really well last quarter. A wonderful idea, I said, a warm surge of pride washing over me. She had a brilliant mind for the business. The future of my store, my legacy, was in good hands. The small, old-fashioned brass bell over the front door tinkled, and Mrs. Gable, one of our oldest and most cherished regulars, came in, her arms full of books she was donating. My day was a series of these small, gentle, and deeply meaningful interactions. The world I had built for myself here in Portsmouth was a good one. It was a world of books, of coffee, of community. It was a world of my own making, and it was a world that was about to be invaded by a ghost from a past so distant, so painful, that I had almost convinced myself it had never happened at all. The call came a little after 11 o'clock. I was in my small, cluttered office in the back of the store, a room that smelled of old paper and cinnamon from the cafe next door. I was on the phone with a publisher, negotiating the terms for an author event. When the call waiting beeped in my ear, I glanced at the caller ID. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a Pennsylvania area code, my old home, a cold. Inexplicable dread washed over me. I never got calls from Pennsylvania. I had no one left there. My life there had ended in 1973. "Can I call you back, John?" I said to the publisher, my voice suddenly a little breathless. I clicked over to the other line, my heart beginning a low, anxious drumming against my ribs. "Hello," I said, "hello." A woman's voice replied. It was a young voice, professional and slightly weary. "Am I speaking with Ms. Rosemary Peterson?" "This is she," I said. "Ms. Peterson, my name is Jessica Albright. I am a social worker with the Cumberland County Department of Human Services in Pennsylvania, Cumberland County." The name of the county where I had grown up, the name of the place I had spent 52 years trying to forget. The floor seemed to shift slightly beneath my feet. "I am calling you today," she continued, her voice a careful, clinical monotone, "regarding your parents, Arthur and Helen Gable, my parents." The words were a physical shock. For 52 years, I had trained myself to think of them in the past tense, as historical figures from a life that was no longer mine. To hear them spoken of in the present tense was a linguistic and emotional earthquake. I don't understand," I stammered, sinking into my desk chair. "I haven't had any contact with them in a very long time." "Yes, we are aware of that," the social worker said, a note of what sounded like practiced, professional sympathy in her voice. "However, in the emergency contact paperwork we have on file for them from several years ago, you are listed as their only next of kin, and your parents, Ms. Peterson, are currently in a state of crisis." She proceeded to lay out the stark, brutal facts of their decline, her voice a calm, dispassionate recitation of a tragedy I had never known was unfolding. My father, Arthur, now 91 years old, had had a serious fall a week ago. He had broken his hip. He was currently in the hospital and would soon be discharged to a rehabilitation facility, but he would not be able to return to their home. He now required a level of care that my mother, Helen, at 89, was completely unable to provide. And that was not all. Their finances, she explained, were a disaster. A series of poor investments made after my father's retirement, combined with the rising costs of their medical care, had completely depleted their life savings. They had taken out a reverse mortgage on their home years ago, and now, with my father's move into a long-term care facility a medical necessity, the terms of that mortgage had been triggered. The bank was foreclosing. They were, in the cold, hard and unforgiving language of the state, homeless and insolvent. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, a silent. unwilling audience to the slow-motion collapse of the two people who had once been my entire world. The two powerful, unassailable, and judgmental figures of my youth were now just a frail, broke, and helpless old people, a case file on a social worker's desk. I have met with them several times. Ms. Albright continued, her voice a low, weary sigh, and I have laid out their options, given their financial situation. The only state-funded option available to them is a long-term placement at the Cumberland Meadows Care Facility. I knew the name. It was the county nursing home, a grim, understaffed, and deeply depressing place that people in my hometown used to refer to as God's waiting room. It is not an ideal solution, I admit, she said, but it is a safe, clean facility, and it is the only one we have. And what did they say? I whispered. A cold, terrible, and dawning dread beginning to creep up my spine. I knew. Somehow, what was coming next? There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, hesitant, and deeply uncomfortable pause. Well, Ms. Peterson, the social worker finally said, and I could hear the professional exhaustion in her voice, the sound of a woman who was tired of dealing with the profound and often baffling complexities of other people's families. Your parents, they have refused the placement at Cumberland Meadows. Refused, I asked. On what grounds? On the grounds, she said, her voice now a flat, emotionless recitation of the facts. That they have a daughter, a successful daughter, a daughter who, they have informed me in no uncertain terms, has a moral and Christian duty to take them in, they have stated, for the official record. Their firm and unwavering expectation that they will be moving in with you. I ended the call. The silence of my small, dusty, book-filled office was absolute. I just sat there, my hand still resting on the receiver, my mind a complete and total blank. It was as if the last 52 years of my life, the life I had, so carefully, so painstakingly, and so proudly built for myself, had been a dream, and I had just been brutally, unceremoniously shaken awake. They had not called me. They had not, in 5 decades, once reached out a hand to see if their daughter, the one they had thrown away like a piece of trash, was alive or dead. But now that they were the ones who were in trouble, now that they were the ones who were helpless and alone, they had not even asked for my help. They had demanded it. They had informed a state official that it was my duty. The sheer, breathtaking, and monumental entitlement of it was a thing of terrible or inspiring beauty. They had not just abandoned me. They had, in their own minds, completely and totally erased the fact of their own abandonment, the 52 years of silence, of my struggle, of my survival, of my success. It was all just an inconvenient detail in the story of their own lives. A story in which they were the long-suffering parents, and I was the prodigal daughter who was now, finally, being called home to do her duty. I stood up and walked out of my office. Through the quiet, peaceful aisles of my bookstore, a place built on the foundations of my own hard work, my own resilience, I walked past Clara, who looked at my pale, shocked face with a look of deep concern. I walked out the front door. The little brass bell giving their cheerful, mocking jingle, and I stood on the sidewalk of my beautiful, historic, and wonderfully safe New England town, I looked at my life, my store, my home, the family I had created, and I thought of them, the two old, frail, and utterly unrepentant ghosts of my past who were now, with a sense of righteous, religious, and profoundly selfish conviction, demanding to be let in, the girl they had kicked out at 18, the scared, pregnant, and utterly alone version of me would have been consumed by a tidal wave of guilt and obligation. She would have said yes. Of course, she would have said yes, but I was not that girl anymore. They had killed that girl on a cold, grey bus station bench 52 years ago. And the woman who had risen from her ashes was a different creature entirely, a woman who had learned in the hardest way imaginable the true meaning of the word no. The quiet, peaceful, and orderly life I had built was about to be thrown into chaos. But it would be a chaos of my own choosing. The reckoning, after a half-century of silence, was about to begin. The decision to return to Pennsylvania was not an easy one. It felt, in many ways, like a surrender. For 2 days after the social worker's phone call, I was a ghost in my own house, drifting from room to room, the past a loud, roaring thing. In my ears I called my son, Mark, my voice a strange, hollow echo of its usual self, and I laid out the impossible situation. His reaction was immediate, a surge of protective, filial rage that was a strange and welcome comfort. Absolutely not, he'd said, his voice a low, angry hum over the phone. No way in hell, Mom, after what they did to you. They don't get to just reappear 50 years later and demand a room in your house. That's not how this works. They're my parents, Mark. I'd whispered the old, conditioned words, tasting like ash in my mouth. They stopped being your parents the day they left you at that bus station. He'd countered, his voice hard. They are your biological progenitors. That is a biological fact. It is not a moral claim on your life. You don't owe them a thing. He was right, of course, my logical mind. The librarian who had spent a lifetime categorizing facts knew. He was right, but the heart is not a library. It is a messy, disorganized archive of old wounds and older loves, and its rules are not logical at all. I have to go, Michael, I'd finally said. I have to see them, I have to look at them, as the woman I am now, and not the girl I was then. I have to see if any part of the people I once loved is still there. Then I'm coming with you. He'd insisted. No, I'd said, my voice firm for the first time. This is a ghost I have to face on my own. The drive from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to my old hometown in central Pennsylvania is a little over 8 hours. 8 hours to traverse for states, 8 hours to travel back 52 years in time. As I drove south, the quaint, coastal beauty of New England slowly gave way to the dense, rolling forests and industrial towns of the Mid-Atlantic. With every mile, the carefully constructed, peaceful world of Rosemary Peterson, the successful bookseller and beloved community member, seemed to flake away, revealing the terrified, abandoned 18-year-old girl who was still, after all these years, hiding underneath memories unbidden and unwelcome, rose up like ghosts from the passing landscape. A rest stop in Connecticut, with its smell of diesel and stale coffee, brought back a visceral memory of trying to sleep in a bus station bathroom. The cold, hard floor pressing into my pregnant belly, my $20 folded into a small, tight square in my pocket, a sign for a small town in New Jersey, a town I had worked in for 6 months as a waitress in a greasy spoon diner, brought back the feeling of the constant, soul-crushing exhaustion of the cheap, rented room with the peeling wallpaper, of the profound and deeply terrifying loneliness of being a young mother with no one, absolutely no one, in the world to call for help. I had spent my entire adult life running from that girl. I had built a fortress of success, of competence, of respectable, middle-class stability to protect myself from her memory, and now I was driving straight back into the heart of the fire that had forged her. I arrived in my old hometown in the late afternoon. It was smaller, sadder, and greyer than I remembered. The vibrant main street of my youth was now a landscape of empty storefronts and faded for lease signs. The old textile mill, the town's former lifeblood, was a crumbling brick behemoth. With broken windows, the town itself seemed to be dying, a quiet, slow death of economic neglect. I found their street, and I saw the house, my childhood home. It was a handsome, two-story colonial, the house that had once been the symbol of our family's perfect, respectable, middle-class life, but it was in a shocking state of disrepair. The white paint was peeling, the black shutters were askew, and the once immaculate lawn was a mess of overgrown weeds. It was a house that had given up, a house that was surrendering to the slow, inevitable forces of decay. It was a perfect, physical metaphor for the two people who were still living inside it. I parked at the curb. I sat in my car for a long, silent moment, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Then I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked up the familiar, cracked concrete path. I knocked on the door. The woman who answered, the social worker, Ms. Albright, was a young, tired-looking woman with kind, compassionate eyes. "Miss Peterson," she asked. I nodded. "Please, come in. They're waiting for you in the living room." I stepped inside. The air in the house was thick and still, heavy with the smell of dust, of old age, and of a faint, medicinal sickroom scent. The furniture was the same, the heavy, dark wood pieces my mother had been so proud of, but they were now covered in a fine layer of dust, the upholstery faded and worn, and there they were, the ghosts. They were sitting together on the old, plastic-covered sofa, a matched set of frail, shrunken strangers. My father, Arthur, was a thin, stooped man, his once powerful frame now a fragile collection of angles. His face was a pale, papery landscape of wrinkles. My mother, Helen, was a tiny, bird-like woman. Her hands, which had once been so full of competent energy, now twisted with arthritis and resting, limp, in her lap. They looked up as I walked in. They looked at me, their 70-year-old daughter, a woman they had not seen since she was 18, and in their faded, watery eyes I saw not a flicker of remorse, I saw not a hint of shame. I saw only a dull, tired, and deeply ingrained sense of expectation. The meeting was a slow, surreal, and deeply uncomfortable affair. Miss Albright, the social worker, tried her best to be a gentle, professional mediator. She laid out the facts of their situation again, the foreclosure on the house, my father's medical needs, the grim, unavoidable reality of the Cumberland Meadows nursing facility. My parents just sat there, listening with a kind of detached impatience, as if this were all a boring, bureaucratic prelude to the real and only solution. When Miss Albright had finished, my mother turned to me. Her voice was thin, reedy, but it still held the same unyielding core of self-righteous authority I remembered so well. Well, she said, her tone one of a person who has reached a perfectly logical and obvious conclusion. It is a terrible situation, but the solution is quite simple. Of course, I just looked at her. I did not speak. You have that big, beautiful house up in New Hampshire, Rosemary, she continued, her voice taking on a new, brighter, and more demanding tone. Your father and I have seen the pictures of it online. It has that lovely guest suite over the garage. It would be perfect for us. We wouldn't be in your way at all. I was so stunned by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of her words that I could not form a reply. She was not asking. She was not pleading. She was informing me. Your father's sister, my Aunt Ginny, called me yesterday, she went on, her voice now a cascade of pre-planned logistics she can help us with. The packing, we won't be able to take the big furniture, of course, but we will have our personal things. The family photographs, your father's good suit. We have been making a list. We should be ready for you to pick us up at the end of the week. I looked at my father. He was just nodding along, a look of tired, pathetic relief on his face. This had been their plan all along. They had not seen me as a daughter to be reconciled with. They had seen me as an exit strategy, a convenient, fully funded retirement home that they could move into, a home that would allow them to sidestep the messy, humiliating consequences of their own financial incompetence. The social worker, Miss Albright, was looking at me, her expression, a mixture of professional neutrality and a deep, profound, and almost comical shock. She had clearly never encountered a case of such pure, unadulterated, and lifelong entitlement. My mother, mistaking my stunned silence for agreement, gave me a small, tight, and triumphant smile. So, she said, clapping her small, arthritic hands together once, it's all settled. Then I just sat there in the dusty, dying living room of my childhood, looking at these two frail, selfish, and utterly unrepentant strangers who had once been my entire world. They were not asking me for forgiveness. They were not asking for help. They were demanding my life again, and they were expecting me, the good, quiet, and obedient daughter, to simply, quietly, and gratefully hand it over. The silence in the room stretched on thick and heavy. They were waiting for my answer, and the answer, a single, beautiful, and 52 years in the making word, was beginning to form on my lips. The silence in that dusty, dying living room was a perfect, crystalline thing. It was a silence filled with the entire, crushing weight of my mother's final, cheerfully delivered and utterly delusional sentence. "It's all settled." Then I looked at her small, bird-like face, so full of a serene, unshakable, and deeply insulting sense of expectation. I looked at my father, who was nodding in agreement, a look of pathetic, dependent relief on his face, and I looked at the social worker, Miss Albright, who was looking at me. Her pen poised over her notepad, her expression a careful, professional, blank, waiting for my confirmation, for my final, dutiful surrender. They all thought they knew how this story was going to end. They had written the script for me a lifetime ago. I was the prodigal daughter, the one who had made a terrible mistake, and now, after a lifetime of deserved struggle, I was being given the opportunity to finally, at the end of their lives, atone for my sins. I was to fall to my knees with gratitude, to welcome my two benevolent, long-suffering parents into my home, and to spend the rest of my days in quiet, dutiful service. A living monument to their forgiveness. A year ago, that script might have worked. The old me, the girl who was still secretly, desperately trying to earn the love she had been denied, might have capitulated. But the woman who sat in that room now was not that girl. I had spent 52 years learning how to live without them, and in doing so, I had learned how to live with myself. The shame they had branded me with at the age of 18 had long since faded, replaced by a quiet, unassailable, and hard-won sense of my own worth. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I looked at my mother's expectant face, and I spoke the single, most powerful, and most liberating word of my entire life. No, I said. The word was not loud. It was not angry. It was a quiet, simple, and beautifully solid thing. It landed in the center of their delusional fantasy like a stone, and the ripples of shock that spread out from it shattered everything. My mother's smile froze, then crumbled. "What?" she whispered. Her voice a small, disbelieving squeak. My father, who had been looking out the window, planning his new life in my garden, swiveled his head to look at me, his expression one of pure, baffled indignation. "What did you say?" I said no. I repeated, my voice a little stronger. This time I turned my gaze to the social worker, a silent acknowledgement that this was now a matter for the official record. Then I turned back to my parents. "Before we continue this discussion about what you feel you were owed," I began, my voice taking on a calm, steady, and dangerously quiet tone. "I think it is important for everyone in this room to have a clear and honest understanding of the last 52 years. The years you seem to have, for the sake of your own convenience, completely and totally erased." And then I told them my story, not the vague, shameful story they had written for me. The one about the girl who had run away, I told them the real one, the one I had lived. On the morning of June 12, 1973, I began, my voice a low, clear monotone. "My father, Arthur Gable, drove me to the Trailways bus station in town. I was 18 years old. I was 3 months pregnant. My boyfriend, the father of my child, had been killed in action in Vietnam 2 months prior. My father, the man who was supposed to protect me, handed me a $20 bill, and he told me that I had shamed God and our family, and that I was no longer his daughter. He left me on that bench, and he never looked back. I looked at my father. His face was a pale, pasty grey. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I am not finished, I said, my voice cutting through his attempt to interrupt. That $20 lasted me 3 days. I spent the first night of my new, independent life sleeping in the bus station bathroom. The next day, I took a bus to Harrisburg. Because it was the biggest city I could think of, I had a small suitcase with 3 changes of clothes and the Bible my mother had so thoughtfully packed for me. I spent the next 2 weeks homeless. I described the hunger, the cold, the gnawing, constant, and soul-crushing fear. I described the men who had looked at a scared, pregnant, 18-year-old girl and had not seen a child in need of help, but an opportunity to be exploited. I described the small, profound kindness of a woman who ran a homeless shelter, a woman who had given me a bed and a hot meal, a woman who had shown me more Christian charity in one evening than my devout, church-going parents had shown me in my entire life. I found a job. I continued, my voice a flat recitation of a history they had never bothered to learn, as a waitress in a truck stop diner. I would work 12-hour shifts on my feet, my body growing heavier and more tired with each passing day. I rented a small, single room in a boarding house, a room with a single bed, a hot plate, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. That was my son's first nursery. I looked at my mother, whose face had crumpled into a mask of horrified disbelief. She was hearing this for the first time. This was the reality of the life she had so easily, so righteously condemned me to. I had your grandson, I said to them, in a charity hospital. Alone, I held him in my arms. And I made him a promise. I promised him that he would never, ever know the kind of fear and loneliness that I had known. I promised him that he would be safe, and that he would be loved, and that his life would be better than mine. I told them about the years that followed, the brutal grinding and relentless poverty, the multiple dead-end jobs, the constant gnawing fear of not being able to make the rent, of not being able to afford a doctor if my son got sick. I told them about the nights I had gone without eating so that my son could have milk. I told them about the shame of having to use food stamps at the grocery store, of the looks of pity and disdain from the other shoppers. And in all of those years, I said, my voice now a low, dangerous thing in all of that struggle, in all of that desperation. Did I ever once call you? Did I ever once write to you, begging for help? Did I ever once show up on your doorstep and demand that you fulfill your duty as parents? They just stared at me, their faces a pale, shocked white. No, I said, I did not, because you had taught me a very hard and very clear lesson on that bus station bench. You taught me that family does not help you when you are in trouble. You taught me that when you make a mistake, you are on your own. You taught me about a love that is conditional, a love that can be withdrawn as a punishment. And you taught me about a God who is not a God of forgiveness, but a God of social appearances. I paused, letting the weight of my history, the history they had refused to acknowledge, finally settle in the dusty, silent room. The social worker, Miss Albright, was no longer looking at her notepad. She was staring at me, her expression a mixture of profound, professional shock and a deep, human compassion. I survived, I said, my voice now quiet again. I did more than survive. I worked, I saved, I went to night school and got my GED. I met a good, kind man who loved my son as if he were his own, and together we built a life, a real life. We built a business, we bought a house, we raised a son who is a good, decent, and successful man. I built a family on the ashes of the one you had burned to the ground, and I did it all with absolutely no help from you. I finally stood up. I was no longer the frightened, pleading child. I was a 70-year-old woman, a matriarch of my own successful clan, and I was in complete and total control. And now, I said, my voice a final, quiet, and utterly damning judgment. After 52 years of complete and total silence, after you effectively and completely abandoned your only child, you sit here, in the wreckage of your own poor choices. And you do not ask for my forgiveness. You do not ask for my help. You demand my home. You demand my life. You demand that I do my duty as a daughter you have not had for half a century. I looked at them, at their two frail, shrunken, and utterly selfish faces, and I delivered my final verdict. You taught me a lesson all those years ago, a lesson in independence, a lesson in self-reliance, a lesson that when the chips are down, you are on your own, and I want you to know I learned the lesson you taught me very, very well. I turned to the stunned, silent social worker, to answer their request, I said, my voice clear and steady, to answer their demand that I take them into my home. The answer is no, I will not be their retirement plan. I am sitting on my porch now, on this quiet, late summer Sunday evening. The story is almost over. I've been reading the comments on my post, the chorus of voices from a world I do not know. And it is a strange and unexpected comfort. You can never truly know what it was like in that room. The 52 years of silence, of pain, of a daughter's quiet, lonely survival, all culminating in that one terrible and necessary monologue. When I finished speaking, the silence that fell was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a truth so absolute, so profound, that it had consumed all the air in the room. It was the silence of a verdict that had just been delivered. My parents just sat there, on their plastic-covered sofa, to small, shrunken, and utterly broken old people, the armor of their pride, of their self-righteousness, of their carefully constructed narrative of the good, Christian parents and the wayward, ungrateful daughter, had been stripped from them layer by painful layer. They were left exposed, not just to me, but to a neutral, official witness from the state, and to the even harsher judgment of their own, long-denied, consciences. My mother was weeping. Not the loud, performative sobs of before, but the silent, racking and heartbroken sobs of a woman who was finally, for the first time, seeing the true and terrible cost of her own choices. My father, the proud, unbending patriarch, just stared at his hands, his face a pale, ashen grey. He looked like a man who had just been forced to read the ugliest chapter of his own life story, and was horrified by the person he had been. The social worker, Ms. Albright, was looking at me. Her professional, neutral mask had slipped, and her eyes were full of a deep and profoundly human compassion. She had come here for a simple family mediation. She had, instead, borne witness to a 52-year-old reckoning. I stood up. My work in this house, the house I had been so brutally ejected from, was finished. I had not come here for a reconciliation. I had not come here to scream and to rage. I had come here to do one thing, to tell the truth, to give my own official and long overdue testimony. Ms. Albright, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room, you have my number. Please call me when you have an update on their placement. I turned and walked out of the living room, out of the house, and I did not look back. I closed the front door softly behind me, leaving the three of them alone in the quiet, dusty wreckage of our family's history. The 8-hour drive back to Portsmouth was a journey through a strange, new, and empty landscape. The rage that had been my companion on the drive down, the grief, the years of pain, it was all gone. I had left it all on the floor of that living room. I felt hollowed out. I had won. I had spoken my truth. I had defeated the ghosts of my past, but the victory was a lonely and a deeply sad one. I had gone there to confront the two people who had hurt me the most in the world, and I had left behind two frail, broken, and helpless old people, and I had, in a very real way, been the one to break them. I spent the next few days in a quiet, reflective fog. I called my son, Mark, and I told him everything that had happened. He was my rock, my unwavering champion. You did the right thing, Mom, he'd said, his voice full of a fierce, protective pride. You told the truth, that's all. You are not responsible for how they chose to react to it. I know, I'd whispered, but they are so old, Michael, so fragile. They were not so fragile when you were 18, and pregnant, and alone, he'd countered, his voice hard. They made their choices, and now they are finally, for the first time, being forced to live with them. That is not cruelty. Mom, that is justice. He was right. But the question remained, what now? My revenge, my great act of telling the truth, had been a destructive one. It had shattered the foundations of their lives. Now I had to decide what, if anything, I was going to build in its place. Was I going to walk away, as they had done to me, and leave them to their fate in the grim, state-run misery of Cumberland Meadows? Was my final act of revenge to be a perfect and perfectly cruel mirror of their own abandonment? I thought of the woman in the homeless shelter who had given me a blanket. I thought of the old, kind-faced diner owner who had given me my first job. I thought of the strangers whose small, decent kindnesses had been the only thing that had allowed me to survive. My parents had taught me the lesson of cruelty. But the world had taught me the lesson of compassion, and I had to decide which lesson I was going to live by. I spent the next week on my computer. I did not research my own history, I researched theirs. I researched every single assisted living and long-term care facility within a 30-mile radius of their town. I read reviews. I looked at state inspection reports. I made spreadsheets. I was a librarian, a researcher, a problem solver. I was, in the end, my parents' daughter. And then I made my final decision. I called Ms. Albright, the social worker. Ms. Albright, I said, my voice calm and professional. I have made my decision regarding my parents. Okay, Rosemary, she said, her voice gentle. I am here to listen. I will not be taking my parents into my home, I began. My voice clear and unwavering. That is a firm and a final boundary. The life they are looking for, the life of a daughter's care, is a life that they themselves made impossible 52 years ago. I cannot give them that. I paused. However, I continued, I will also not allow them to be sent to Cumberland Meadows. I have found a private facility. It is called the Oakwood Residence. It is clean. It is safe. It is respectable. The state inspection reports are excellent. It is not the Four Seasons. But it is a place of dignity. Rosemary, she started. That kind of facility, the cost, I am aware of the cost. I interrupted gently, and I will be covering it, all of it. I will set up an automatic, monthly payment from my own account. For as long as they both shall live, I will be the financial guarantor. I will be the responsible emergency contact. I will be their next of kin. But all communication, all day-to-day matters, must go through you or through the facility's administration. I will be their daughter, but I will be so from a safe and a professional distance. I had made my offer, the final, strange, and deeply complicated act of my revenge. I was not offering them the warm, intimate, and forgiving embrace of a family. I was offering them a cold, detached, and financially responsible form of care. I was not giving them the loving daughter they had suddenly decided they wanted. I was giving them the competent, professional, and emotionally distant stranger they had raised me to be. It was a cruel kindness, or perhaps a kind cruelty. I am sitting on my porch now, on this Sunday evening in August. The story is over. My parents moved into the Oakwood residence a few months ago. I visit them once a month. Our visits are quiet, polite, and deeply, profoundly sad. We talk about the weather. We talk about the food in the cafeteria. We do not talk about the past. There is no grand reconciliation. There is no tearful, movie-ending forgiveness. There is only the quiet, respectful, and carefully boundaried relationship of three old people who are carrying the heavy, shared weight of a lifetime of pain. They are safe. They are cared for. I have, in the end, done my duty, but I have done it on my terms, not on theirs. I have refused to give them the one thing they truly wanted, the absolution of a happy family reunion. The cozy, comfortable ending to a story in which they were the heroes. So, I leave it to you, Reddit. My revenge was not to abandon them as they had abandoned me. My revenge was to provide them with a cold, responsible, and utterly loveless form of care. I gave them the safety they had denied me, but I have denied them the intimacy they felt they were owed. So, tell me, 8 over my revenge of a cold and quiet kindness. It is Sunday night, and I have spent the last few hours reading the words of strangers on the internet, all of you weighing in on the impossible architecture of my family. Your comments are a chaotic, deeply divided, and wonderfully human chorus. Some of you have called me a hero, some of you have called me a cold, unforgiving monster, and many of you have said that the truth lies somewhere in between. The final verdict, I suppose, is not for you or for me to decide. The final verdict came quietly, a year later, in a small, sterile room that smelled of rubbing alcohol and regret. The year that followed my great confrontation was a year of quiet, difficult, and carefully negotiated peace. My parents moved into the Oakwood residence. It was, as I had researched, a clean, safe, and respectable facility. It was not a punishment, but it was not a home. It was a place of quiet, orderly waiting. I kept my promise. I paid for everything, a single, automatic, and deeply impersonal bank transfer that occurred on the 1st of every month. I was the perfect, dutiful, and distant daughter. I visited them once a month, on the first Sunday of every month. Our visits were models of polite, civilized restraint. We would sit in the facility's bright, slightly too warm common room. I would bring them a new book or a puzzle. We would talk about the weather. We would talk about the other residents. We would talk about my grandchildren. We would talk about absolutely nothing that mattered. We never, ever spoke of the 52 years of silence. We never spoke of the bus station. We never spoke of the life I had lived without them. The past was a locked room, and we had all, it seemed, tacitly agreed to leave the door closed. My father, whose fall had been the catalyst for this entire late-in-life reckoning, grew weaker. The broken hip had been the beginning of a slow, steady decline. He was a proud man, a man who had always been defined by his physical presence, and the loss of his mobility was a loss of his very self. He became quieter, more withdrawn. My mother, Helen, became his fierce, tiny, and increasingly exhausted protector. As the months passed, my visits became more frequent. I was not visiting them as a daughter fulfilling a begrudging duty anymore. I was visiting them as a human being, watching two other human beings begin the final, difficult, and inevitable process of fading away. The anger I had held onto for so long, the anger that had fueled my great speech, had long since dissipated, and in its place was a deep, quiet, and profoundly complicated sadness. I would look at my father, a frail, paper-thin shadow of the powerful, terrifying man who had abandoned me, and I would feel not hatred, but a strange, aching pity. The end for him came in the spring. His body, which had been slowly surrendering for a year, began to fail rapidly. He was moved to the facility's palliative care wing. And in those final weeks, the walls we had also carefully constructed around our hearts finally, blessedly, began to crumble. I started visiting every day. I would just sit with him. He could no longer speak much, his voice a low, raspy whisper. There were no more pretenses, there was no more pride. There was just a father and a daughter in a quiet room at the end of a long and very difficult road. One afternoon, I was sitting by his bed, reading to him from a book of poetry. My mother was asleep in the armchair in the corner, his hand, a gnarled, bony, and surprisingly strong thing, reached out and clutched mine. "Rosemary," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of sound. "I'm here, Dad," I said. He turned his head to look at me. His eyes, which had been cloudy and distant for days, were suddenly startlingly clear. They were the eyes of the father I remembered from my childhood. And they were full of a lifetime of unshed tears. "I was a fool," he whispered, each word. "An immense effort, a proud and a stupid fool." I just squeezed his hand. I did not know what to say. That day, he continued, his eyes locked on mine. At the bus station, it was the greatest, most profound, and most unforgivable sin of my entire life. I let my pride, my fear, my shame be bigger than my love for my own child. There has not been a day in 52 years that I have not been haunted by the sight of you sitting on that bench, watching me drive away. The tears were streaming down my own face now, the apology, the one I had told myself I no longer needed, the one I had convinced myself I no longer wanted. It was here. I was so proud of you, Rosie. He whispered, using my childhood nickname. For the first time in more than half a century, always I would follow your life. From a distance, I saw the article in the paper when you opened your bookstore. I saw the announcement of your wedding to that good man, David. I saw the picture of you with your son. And I was so proud and so ashamed. He took a ragged, painful breath. You were a better child to us, a better person than we ever deserved to be parents to you. Can you ever forgive me? I leaned forward and I kissed his forehead, my tears falling onto his pale, wrinkled skin. "I already have, Dad," I whispered. "I already have." He died 2 days later, holding my hand. My mother is a ghost of her former self now, without my father, her anchor, her partner in their long, shared life of pride and prejudice. She is adrift. My monthly, dutiful visits have become a daily, necessary reality. I am her only family. I am all she has left. Our relationship is a strange and quiet thing. The anger is gone. The entitlement is gone. All that is left is her profound and her profoundly lonely need. And my quiet, steady, and now deeply compassionate presence. I am sitting with her now in her small, neat room at the Oakwood residence. We are looking through an old photo album. One of the few she brought from the old house. It is an album I have never seen, one from before I was born. She turns a page, her gnarled, arthritic finger tracing the edge of a small, black and white photograph. It is a picture of her and my father, young, beautiful, and full of a hope so bright it is almost painful to look at. We wanted you so much. You know, she says, her voice a soft, papery whisper. She is not looking at me, she is looking at the past. For 10 years we tried, for 10 years we prayed. And then you came, and you were a miracle, our perfect, beautiful miracle. She finally looks at me, her old eyes full of a deep and a weary understanding. And we were so afraid, she whispers. So afraid that someone would come and take our miracle away. We were so busy protecting our own hearts, we forgot to protect yours. It is the closest she will ever come to a real apology, and I know in my heart that it is enough. So that's the end of the story. I sit here now on my porch in Portsmouth, and the final verdict of the internet seems a small and an insignificant thing. The final ledger of my life is not one of anger or of revenge, or even of justice. It is a ledger of a deep and a complicated and a hard one. Love. I did not give my parents the ending they felt they were entitled to, but I did, in the end, give them the one thing they had so cruelly denied me: a daughter's presence, a daughter's compassion, and a daughter's grace at the very end of their lives. I did not do it for them. I did it for me. I did it for the 18-year-old girl on the bus station bench. I did it to prove that the lesson they had taught me, the lesson of cold, conditional love, was not the lesson I had chosen to live by, and that, I have decided, is a victory and a peace. That is more than enough for me.